Now, to look at the question of revisiting Malaya, I decided that we have to look at the processes across different time frames in Singapore history. Right, just a brief introduction. 1946, we were cut off from the peninsula by the British returning after the Second World War. And by and large, one can say that the people of Singapore and the political parties and so forth were all assuming that there will be a reunification. If it doesn't come automatically, there will be a push for this. Okay? Lo and behold, 1963, we are merged with Malaysia in the merger campaign. Right? It was very short-lived, barely 2 years, 1965, Singapore and Malaysia separated. Okay? From then on, the Malayan dream has been submerged. Not exterminated, submerged, for more than 50 years. Okay? Only in more recent years has this dream been revived. And this is the process that I would like to trace. Okay? Now, this, I contrasted what we call the Malayan dream, okay, with something I call the Singapore story, okay, brackets, the Malayan nightmare. The Singapore story talks about how Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia, right, due to circumstances that are really a betrayal of Malaysia as Singapore government understood it. So, what we have to do as Singaporeans is to prove to the Malaysians that we can survive, we can be better than you. You are our nightmare. We want nothing to be like you. Hence, I use the term the Malayan nightmare, which is what the Singapore story is about, the Singapore dream is about. Okay? This has been very, very powerful in the Singapore psyche. Okay? Let me begin by, I'd like to read a fairly long article out from a blog. Okay? It's easy to understand. So I didn't bother to do a PowerPoint because I think it hampers me. But the context is this. In 2009, it is March, I think. Yes, it is March. The Straits Times published a book review, okay, featuring a book called Our Thoughts Are Free. Our Thoughts Are Free. It is a book of poems edited by Tan Jin Hui, Teo So Lam, and Koh Kay Yew, all three of whom had been former political prisoners in Singapore. It is a collection of poems and containing also one prose piece by 7 former political detainees who were imprisoned in different times. 1950s, some 1960s, some 1970s, some 1980s. I think this shows the extent to which the Internal Security Act, under which such detentions were legislated, has been so often used in Singapore. Alright. Now, here I would like to acknowledge Professor Raman Embong's quick about how victors write history, losers write poetry, and memoirs. So yes, poetry plays an important part in this. Okay, for one thing, it's supposed to be safer to begin with. We don't think it attracts that much attention. But I must also say it's not just poetry. Poetry and memoirs. Okay, what losers do. Losers also do, by the way, obituaries. Okay? What I mean is that one of the earliest signs, alright, of resistance, let's put it this way, that I've put my finger on, are obituaries put in the newspapers when prominent left-wing people died. Okay? One of the earliest was not even a political detainee, not a leftist, but the mother of a leftist. Lim Chin Siong's mother passed away. In the Chinese newspapers, her photograph, okay, a dedication to say what a great mother to have produced a great son, to whom the obituary it's a condolence, okay, was expressed. Lists and lists and lists of names of political detainees, names that never make it into the public forum in any other instance. When Chin Siong himself died, okay, again, the same thing. When T.T. Raja, a left-wing lawyer, died, again the same thing. The same list of names, the insistence on the sense of solidarity, on the sense of we exist. Okay, we are not non-people, we are not non-persons. But this was a very gradual process. But that was how I think it was testing the grounds in the mid-1990s. But let me get back to March 2009 and the book. Our Thoughts Are Free, this book of poems by generations, represented by almost every decade. I think starting with Said Zahari, and then of course Bingui himself, Joshua Lang, people like that, whom I will mention. Right? Now the Straits Times, as I've said, gave it a fairly interesting, positive review. All right? The reviewer noted, I quote, the heartfelt accounts of those who experienced first-hand painful aspects of Singapore's recent past. All right? Meaning political detention for prolonged periods of time, okay, and not under very pleasant conditions. Right? Now, it is quite something for Straits Times to even review the book, not to say give it a fairly positive count. Okay? The Straits Times article goes on to say, these stories provide a counterpoint to the official accounts of the security threats that serve to justify each successive waves of detention. So of course, internal security, all these detentions has been glossed over, has been explained by the government as being for the security and safety of the country because these are subversive communists. Right, so this poetry book offers a counter to this portrayal. Even though this was presented in a very positive light by the Straits Times, there's a larger, it was actually against the popular imagination of what these people are like. So I found a blog site by Yawning Bread, who's a very, very respected veteran of blog writing in Singapore. All right? He writes on all sorts of political matters, social matters. He himself is an activist, especially in not only gay rights, for which he's very well known, but also transient workers, the migrant workers. To this day, Alex Au is very involved in these matters. Right? Alex did not attend the book launch held in Singapore of this particular poetry book, but he was in Kuala Lumpur when there was there was a Kuala Lumpur book launch as well. Alex Au happened to be in KL. When I wrote, I said, he must have come for this. He didn't. He happened to be at another affair, another meeting. He came over. And he was saying to himself, I asked myself, what is the political significance of the event I am writing about? And he gave us the answer right from the start of his blog. The answer seems to be none. No political significance for him. Okay? In fact, not only was it no political significance, I would say that Alex Au was greeted by the Singapore nightmare. Now he writes this. Francis Khoo told the room that he would open his remarks with an introduction in Malay. Now Francis Khoo was a former political detainee. He was not a former political detainee, he was about to be detained, he managed to escape. So he was a political exile. Francis passed away recently. So Francis Khoo came to the KL launch, he can't go into Singapore, and so he writes poetry, he wrote poetry, he wrote songs. So Yawning Bread, the blogger, said, Francis Khoo told the room that he would open his remarks with an introduction in Malay, Singapore's national language. It struck me as a gesture meant to prove his patriotism, except that it not only appeared rather contrived, but extremely dated. I'm sure he was sincere, but being in exile for the last 3 decades might have left him completely out of touch with what Singapore is today. Khoo's decision to use Malay, therefore, had the unfortunate effect of consigning the rest of the launch event into the dustbin of history. It made people think, These guys don't know what they are talking about. They are irrelevant to modern Singapore. Who also, according to Yoni Brett, who also seemed really proud of a song, too proud, says Yoni Brett, a paean to Singapore's national flower. Alright, so Francis Khoo was talking about Bunga Raya, and he wrote a song called Bunga Raya, and I think he probably performed it. Okay, so Yoni Brett's objection was this. Okay, yes, he sang about Singapore's national flower, Bunga Raya, except that Bunga Raya, and the blogger had to explain hibiscus to give it its English name because readers wouldn't know what Bunga Raya is, Singaporeans nowadays. Except that Bunga Raya is Malaysia's national flower, not Singapore's. He goes on. For a brief period between 1963 and 1965, when we were part of Malaysia, there was indeed a cheesy nation-building campaign celebrating the hibiscus as our national flower. But this ceased as soon as separation took place in August 1965. Then Francis Khoo confused one patriotism with another, undermined his attempt to position himself as a loyal, if dissenting, Singaporean. Yoni Brett goes on. Ko Kei-Yew, who was one of the co-editors, picked up on Francis's theme, and Ko Kei-Yew said, "We are the last of our generation." And he called his generation a pan-Malayan species. And Francis Khoo also said, Ko Kei-Yew also said, for people my age, Malaya was not some abstract political concept, but a social reality. One aspect of our common Malayan heritage is detention without trial. The blogger goes on. This sounds like an appeal to a Malaysian audience why the book they were launching might be relevant to them and one that they should buy. But if I repeated these words to Singaporeans, this was in KL, right? So if I go back to Singapore and I tell them this, okay, I think they will leave people cold. To the vast majority of Singaporeans today, the concept of Malaya is archaic, out of date. Anyone boasting of such credentials is casting himself as a fish out of water. I want to ask whether, in their view, a country can do away completely without detention, without trial, and whether a justifiable case can remain for such a law, right? Perhaps with more checks and balances as legitimate state response to violent extremists and terrorists, we should accept detention without trial. Okay, Alex goes on. It is related to an age-old conundrum. Must a democratic society give free rein to those who would use that freedom to destroy democracy? Not having enough time for my turn to ask that question, I guess we may never know their stand. Perhaps it doesn't matter that we may not know. Perhaps it is a question for Singaporeans living in modern Singapore, not for those enamored of a bygone Malaya to answer. Okay, that's the end of the blog. Now, it is very evident that Alex R. walked into this room of strangers, of old people wearing batik shirts, one with Bunga Raya, but all trying to express some form of Malayanness, which to him was totally alienating, okay, and even pretentious. Right? So he was in fact turned off by these people trying to show some form of patriotism to a political system that we Singaporeans had rejected, totally out of date. Right? The strangeness, that these people are strangers, even aliens to our, okay, is I would say was the common phenomenon in Singapore. Yet the good poet Lee Su Ping, writing in the blurb of the book of poetry, had this to say, okay, that this volume of poems has the potential to surprise us with our own empathy, and to move and fortify us with the conviction of our essential freedom within circumstances few of us will experience at first hand. Alright? So, the way to appreciate this book is to uncover the lives of a particular group of people, okay, whom we do not know, but their circumstances is something that, because it comes with poetry, wins our sympathy and even surprises us, okay, for the feeling that we have for them. Alex Au did not see this. Now, I'm not condemning Alex Au, by the way. Okay? It is significant that this is in March 2009. I'm going on to say how Alex Au, in fact, changed his mind very quickly and why. That is the gist of my paper. How, from Singapore nightmare, Alex and others have embraced the Malayan dream. But I'm just showing the sort of the, let's say, the hegemonic view. That's what most people think. Right? We are not Malaysians, we don't want to be. Malay is our national language, but let's pretend that, and that's all, and that's all it matters. We don't have to speak it, we don't even have to remember that it's our national language. So, Alex's piece struck a group of us who at that time happened to form this e-journal called Spores, which is a play of course on Singapore's name, okay, S-P-O-R-E. The short form for Singapore, you put the plural, spores. Okay? We had a meeting and we decided that as historians, we want to respond, not to attack Alex, but to say how common this view is. And this common, the reason why this view is so common is because of the historic amnesia that has befallen Singapore. We don't know our past, we have been encouraged, urged, okay, to forget our historical past. Okay? So this whole thing about common sense history as given to us as what we learn in school, okay, what the government says and so forth, that period of history is the huge battle for the survival of Singapore between the forces of communism, okay, and the forces of whatever you want to call it, nationalism, perhaps, okay, which of course covers up the whole history of the anti-colonial movement in Singapore. Right. So what we did was to get this historian called Sai Xiu-Ning to write a critique of Alex's piece, and she talks, as I've mentioned quickly, the question of historical amnesia, the common senseness, how what we are told is our history has been ingrained so that it's almost commonsensical in Singaporeans, meaning that we accept without having to think why this is what we are told, right? So all this relates to the Internal Security Act as well. Okay? So the big question that Alex asked, we have to face this question. Can a democratic country allow so much freedom that those who want to undermine democracy can use it? Right? Now this is actually a false proposition. The minute you frame your question this way, you already predetermine your answer. Okay? So what we need to do is then to put this question in a historical context and say in what instances was Internal Security Act used to detain who, all right, and on what grounds. So, Xiu-Ning also suggested, therefore, that we need to historicize this question, and if you do so, if you historicize the use of the Internal Security Act in the 1950s and 60s, you can see that it is the elimination of possible rivals to the PAP, especially in Operation Cold Storm, 1963, where 200 people and more were detained, okay, not very long before a general election, so that those who were detained were not able to stand for that election. Okay? So this is the kinds of argument that went on, okay, in this very limited space. Right? So Sai Xiu-Ning emphasized that the ISA was not only instrumental in shaping the political landscape of late colonial Malaya and Singapore. Detention without trial underwrote the formation of Malaysia and Singapore's achievement of independence through merger with Malaysia. So the ISG not only took away political rivals among others, but was also the core behind the formation of Malaysia. So this is the great irony that Tan Jin Hui pointed out in his book, Comet in the Sky, which was a volume on Lim Chin Siong, the left-wing, the sort of left-wing leader, the acknowledged left-wing leader in the 1950s and 60s. Okay. Now, Tan Jin Hui noted this irony. Okay, and the irony is that when we were in Malaysia, which was the dream, the Malayan dream come true, all right, but it wasn't. Okay, because of the nature of merger, it wasn't. Okay, it in fact led to the break-up of the Malayan dream. Okay, he put it this way: the real tragedy was that the cause of genuine reunification on fair and reasonable terms had been set back for a long time, obstructing and prejudicing any hope of fresh attempts for many years to come. It is difficult to imagine how ill-conceived that fateful venture in the early 60s can be It is difficult to imagine how that ill-conceived fateful venture in the early 60s can be historically defensible, as it resulted in betraying the ostensible aim of the vision of a united country. A new generation would grow up with the continuous tensions and mistrust that had their roots in the grim years of the 60s. It is now inevitable that a long time must elapse before a new realization can re-emerge for a fresh attempt to realize the unfinished task of national reunification. So not only was the Malayan dream in tatters after the 2 short years in Malaysia, it was so traumatic for the people of Singapore, okay, that any idea that we want to be part of Malaya, we want to be part of Malaysia, is treated as Alex Au put it, something that is totally, sort of frightening to Singaporeans. So, what is the Malaysia scheme? Okay. Now, I found an article that Tan Jin Hui wrote when he was in the University of Singapore in 1963, at the time when the merger debate was on. And this is what merger was about, according to him. Okay. The basic motivation is to mount up anti-communist hysteria with a purpose to rush through a freak arrangement whereby socialist strength will be excluded from the constitutional arena in the larger federation. The way to achieve this is to restrict the democratic rights of the people of Singapore so that they may not be in a position to exert an influence on political trends in the federation. The federal government at the same time can utilize its control over internal security to curb tendencies in the name of anti-communism, which may be detrimental to their interests. Right? So merger itself is part of this larger scheme, okay, to eliminate socialist forces from both Singapore and Malaysia. This is what he is telling us. Okay? And so the dream was shattered. Okay? And from 1965 till, I would say, about the year 2000, very slowly, things heightened up in 2009, as I will account. Okay? Till now, we hear the Malayan dream again. Okay? So what is this Malayan dream? Okay? This Malayan dream is exactly what Professor Rahman Embong talked to us about today, going back to the People's Constitution, going back to Putra AMCJA, right, of Singapore being part of Malaya, Melayu being the citizenship, Malay being the national language. Okay? In this period, this Malayan dream is being articulated. You can hear about this Malayan dream very much through the speeches of Dr. Po Su Kai. In December 2012, he met up with a group of young activists in KL. Okay, this group is called Collective Intelligence, who was doing a series, Lives on the Left. Okay? This group had wanted to learn from Dr. Poe about the Barisan Socialists, okay? The opposition party, the most powerful and popular opposition party to the PAP in the early 1960s. Okay? Lim Chin Siong was the Secretary General, Ho Su Kai was the Assistant Secretary General. Okay? On speaking to some of these young activists, Dr. Poe discovered that he can't just talk about the Barisan Socialists, which was formed in July 1961. He had to go to the beginning, and the beginning was 1946. The Malayan Democratic Union, the MDU, wrote the People's Constitution, and what we heard this morning, so forth. Okay? Now, this same narrative about the People's Constitution, the Malayan Dream, again was the theme for Dr. Poe's talk on a very significant event, the 50th anniversary of Operation Cold Storm, which was on 2nd February 2013. A large commemoration event was held in Hong Lim Speaker's Corner. Okay, the only space we have where you can hold, what they call it, a Hyde Park and so forth, where you can make speeches, where you can hold rallies and things like that. On that occasion, he not only spoke at the Hong Lim gathering, which was very, very well attended, okay, he also wrote a piece in Yawning Bread, Alex Au's blog. Alex Au invited Dr. Poe to write, and he did so with the title Democracy and Human Rights in Deep Freeze, the Legacy of Operation Cold Storm. So what happened between March 2009, when Alex Au felt so alienated, okay, at the Purdy book launch, and 2013 February, when he said, I want a piece like this on my blog page. Alex Au is sort of very protective about the quality of his blogs. Okay, to be invited means you're alright with him, he thinks you can do a good job. Okay, very hard to get invitations from him to write. Right? Let me account what happened after the book launch in KL that Yawning Bread attended, which has to do with it. There are lots of events, but let me just give some of these. In 2009, June, that means not long after the publication of the book poems, another publication came out by the same group of people. All right, I'll explain who these are later. Called That We May Dream Again. That We May Dream Again. Okay? This is an account, short essays by the detainees in 1987 who were arrested in something called Operation Spectrum. Okay, I think there was a parallel here too. The people who were arrested included a group that was from the Catholic Church workers. And in 2009, June, they put together this volume telling their stories. Okay? By this time, I think Alex found that these people were people he could identify with, because these group of people, we argue, are basically social workers, whether it be church workers, human rights workers, whatever the case may be. Right? And he said, look, I'm into these causes. These people are into these causes. I can identify with them. And so gradually he becomes part of this network. Okay? And Alex Au is not the only one. Okay? We have more and more commemoration. Any event we will commemorate. That is of course meaningful to the left. They began very slowly, people were afraid to come. Okay? But the momentum has started. The detainee groups of 1987 is very, very important. They are the younger group, I said younger meaning by now in the 1980s, the 60s, right? But they were the earlier social activists. Okay? They took up issues of the factory workers, they took up issues of foreign labor, okay, that were badly treated. right? But they helped out with rival political parties, with the PAP, and the culmination of all this is that they were arrested. Even the official accounts, alright, even the official accounts will tell you that this group, the arrests of this group, is the least defensible. Right? Even ministers have come out to say, we should not have done that. So, the power of this group is that they're not only talking about themselves, they have linked themselves with the older generation batch of former detainees, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They are the ones with the energy, with the links to other connections in civil society and so forth, okay, to hold these kinds of events. Okay? So, whenever we have an event like this, they will be, for one thing, organizing the logistics, right? I can tell you the older folks don't know how to apply online to use Hong Park. Okay? All have to wait for this group to do so. Okay? They also are very good at publications. So every event there will be a commemorative volume. Okay, and these are very important documentations. Right? So this group has formed itself into a handful of them. 6, 7, 8. Okay? Called Function 8, whose motto is restart, rejuvenate, reclaim. Okay. Restart the engine, okay, that has been more or less turned off from the time they were released from detention, rejuvenate their dreams, reclaim their place in Singapore society and Singapore history. So, I mentioned just now Dr. Po's speech in Hong Park on 2nd February 2013. He titled the speech, The Dream, 50 years later. And again, he accounted what the Malayan dream was. It is about a new and independent nation called Malaya, embracing Singapore, a multicultural nation in which all communities will be treated equally. A nation that will be independent of British colonial rule, where there will be respect for human rights, democracy, social justice, freedom from starvation, freedom of expression and assembly. Okay? The British, of course, had different ideas. Dr. Po was not the final speaker. The final speaker was Teo So Lang, again, who moved from being a non-person to being a person when she wrote her biography, when she wrote her memoir, Beyond the Blue Gate. Okay? It was a very important book. The first, really, that details so carefully her thoughts, her fears, her struggles, her disappointments, and so forth in detention. And she became a person. She even ran for the elections, knowing that she would lose, but making the point that political detainees have every right to stand for elections. And again, this is what then galvanized people like Alex and others in civil society to be able to identify, to be able to work with, collaborate with, support, and so forth, all these ventures, just as they too got into, their helped out in other organizations other than themselves. So Teo So Lang was a final speaker at this event on at Hong Lim Gardens at the 50th anniversary. Okay. They were the organizers of this event, and they chose the title for the event, We Remember. We Remember, and Dr. So Lang followed Dr. Po's speech. Okay? And So Lang spoke on the abuse of the ISA, and she ended by turning to Dr. Po to thank him, Said Zahari, and the survivors of Operation Cold Storm for liberating us from the rule of the colonialists. To me, this is the passing on, okay, to the passing on of a Malayan dream that lives on, at least in this corner, okay, of the Singapore political life. Now, I was going to end on this high note. By the way, I forgot to talk about Down Kasum. Remember I was talking about this group called Collective Intelligence that invited Dr. Poh to talk. Now I'm not a blogger, and I don't surf the net and all that, so I don't have Facebook. So there's lots more materials for me to hunt for, but I didn't. I just managed to get something. A blog page by Down Kasum, okay, Fadi, young fellow in his 30s, I think. He was at Dr. Poh's talk in KL, and he noted in his blog that Dr. Poh often paid homage to the Malay left, as a matter of fact, mentioning names such as Burhanuddin Helmi, Ahmad Bostamam, Pak Sako, alright, who's Ishaq Haji Muhammad. These names, says Down Kasum, these names inspire a certain type of ideal in contrast to the prescribed role models of Lieutenant Adnan and Hang Tuah. He also noted that the standard version is often full of precautionary tales about racial strife and discord, if not for the presence of draconian laws. That means we needed draconian laws, otherwise we have racial strife and discord. However, says Down Kasum, Dr. Poh's narrative turns this tale on their head. It was repression which destroyed the solidarity of the races to break the united front against colonialism. Down Kasum concluded that the history that Dr. Poh delineated was like a rope, which gives clarity to Singapore's past, the contemporary situation, and what lies ahead. So, to the teaser, to the nice epigram put up by Professor Rahman Embong this morning about victors writing history and losers writing poetry and memoirs, I think that we also see history starting to emerge, perhaps as part of memoirs, as part of memory, okay, by people who have lived through that period and are now historicizing their own life, okay, their own ideals, whatever it is, okay, so that this can be part, okay, of a Singapore story as well. Now I was going to end there, happy ending and all that, and I contacted the organizers to say, I don't think I can cover 50 minutes. Okay? And they said, never mind, but would you like to show this? But do you know of this little filmlet, 3 minutes? And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I know this filmlet, never thought I could use it. Okay? So, let me tell you a bit about the filmlet and then you'll see it. It was, the filmlet is called Happy and Free. Okay? It is done by this film director called Wu Jun-feng, okay, whom I will talk about later. Okay, and it is based on a song which was played over and over again during the days where the government was propagating merger. I had to sing it in school. Alright, it's very catchy, it's very fun. Let's see what Wu Jun-feng has done to this. It's 2013 biennial, so just last year. Okay? And then I'll mention a few words about what this clip says to me. Right? Right. Now, the person who made this film is a young man in his 30s with the name of Bu Jun Feng. Okay? In 2011, Bu Jun Feng came out with a feature film called Sandcastle, okay, which was an award-winning film overseas. Okay. Sandcastle was about a boy turning into man, 18 years old, about to go into the army. Okay. He's somehow a fairly irritated little young man, doesn't seem to be happy, a bit uptight. His father has passed away. He lives with his mother, who is even more uptight than he is. Okay? There's something about it that strains their relationship. Okay? He gets on better with his grandparents. The strain comes from this, that the family has been hiding something from him. Okay? The father, who has died, was a political detainee from a Chinese middle school, became as a political detainee. The mother was spared. Okay? Even though, in the course of the film, we learned that she was more active than him, she was more left than him. Okay? But she escaped imprisonment, he went to prison. So this film is about this boy finally discovering all this, mainly through his grandparents. In the meantime, he himself, as I said, has very strained relations with his mother. The mother has a new beau, he's going out with a guy, who's a colonel in the army, who's responsible for the next big National Day parade. He's commander for the National Day parade. Okay? The mother teaches in a junior college, she conducts a choir, she teaches these National Day songs to the students. Okay? And somehow something he feels is wrong. By the way, the mother is also a very fervent Christian. Okay? Very fervent Christian. So he's not happy. Okay? When he finally learns of why, when he finally learns of his parents' background, he understands why the mother behaves the way she does. Okay? He accepts it, right? He embraces her, but more or less he walks away. Okay? What he doesn't carry with him, alright? At least that's how I read it. What he doesn't carry away with him is the burden of that past. What he carries away with him is the knowledge of that past for him to live the life that he wants to make out of that. Right? He doesn't have to put down everything he does and pick up his parents' course. That's not the point. And Bu Jun Feng does this very cleverly. Alright? Yes, he uses historical, he does his historical research and so forth, but he, I think, purposely mixes up facts here and there a bit, okay? So that it, so that it isn't so much a history class for his audience. Okay? So that the whole point we want to look at is the suppression of memory rather than what actually happened in the past. Right? Now, that helps me to understand this little clip. Okay? He explains what Happy and Free is about. He says, in Happy and Free, the reality of Singapore I'm presenting is not actually very different from the one we have today. It is very interesting to me how so many people expect it to be a different reality, almost as if it needs to be so. I cannot help but feel that we have somehow been conditioned to think that way. What if things didn't turn out very differently? Okay? So the whole the theme of the Biennale 2013 is if the world changed. Alright, so to think of alternate kinds of realities. What Bu Jun Feng does is to pick this reality okay, alternate reality of what happens if we did break up with Malaysia. Okay? And his imagination, all right, he is ready to imagine that, hey, it would not have been bad at all. Okay? We would be as prosperous as we are now. You know, we will have the LRT stations as we are now. We could be happy. Okay? Now, for that kind of imagination to exist, I would argue that it requires putting down the burden of the past. It is a reply to Tanjung Hui. And it is a reply also to the questions that were floating just now. I think William raised it, somebody else did, maybe this, to say that, you know, how long must we wait before we can contemplate Malaysia and Singapore coming together again? Okay? If we think of the Malaysian years of Singapore, 1963 to 1965, okay, as Jin Hui said, it's so traumatic, it's so deep, the kinds of wounds that we cannot contemplate. But what happens if we think, okay, we know what happened, we don't have to be burdened by that. Okay? We can establish new imaginations with Malaysia, with Malaysians. Okay? Then, this becomes a possibility, and we break out from that conventional mode that he talks about, that is almost a necessity that Singaporeans think. That, you know, how did he put it? Yeah, that a different reality has to be a negative one. Okay? I can't help but feel that we have somehow been conditioned to think that way. Alright, that we can't have, you know, that Singapore cannot be happy as Malaysia. Right? It's a very big leap of faith. It is a leap that says our history has set us in a certain direction. Can we keep that faith and yet, you know, can we accept our history and yet move forward from there? Okay? And I think it is people of his generation, okay, people like Jun Feng, people on stage, people who are doing what you call that, drama, theatre, filmmaking, and so forth, they have very good relations with the Malaysians. Okay? And I think it is at this level, okay, that maybe the lightness of history, okay, will come to pass, okay, will lead us to something that the burden of history, okay, may make, you know, takes a longer path. Alright? Yes, it is important that we have our books on Operation Coastal, we have our speeches, we have our writing of history, writing RIGHT, putting it right, you know, writing of history and so forth. It is very important. But we cannot burden the younger generation, nor will they accept the burden, okay, as the only way to move ahead. It provides a groundwork. How it takes off in a different direction, I would say, is perhaps beyond what, you know, sort of beyond the activities that how am I going to put it, that I have been narrating.